Hey guys, welcome back to the Realms of Reading, and today I'm going to be going through my top 10 favorite books of all time. Before I get started, I'd like to give a huge thank you to everyone for helping me get to 25 subscribers. It's not a lot, but with only 3 videos in less than a week, that's pretty good, and I'm really happy about that, and it wouldn't be possible without all of you, so thank you. So I guess let's get started. Number 10 is a bit of a spoiler for this Monday, but it is Mistborn, The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. It is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, and it is by far my favorite. Not to say the others are bad, but this is just everything I look for in a fun political story. It follows the characters as they're recovering from the events of the first book, and it goes over so much of their character growth and development, and it is such a perfect sequel. I love it. And it's just, I love this book so much. It's my favorite Brandon Sanderson book so far. Hopefully we'll see if anything else overtakes it, but for now it's just, on my top list of favorite books. Number 9 is Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. It is the first real Star Wars expanded universe book. It came out back in 1991. And I read it back when I got into Star Wars before the new Disney movies came out. And it is just a masterpiece. It's also a part of a trilogy, but by itself, it's just a perfect story. It follows the original characters fighting this evil Sherlock Holmes style genius known as Grand Admiral Thrawn. And Thrawn is just my all-time favorite villain in anything, period. He's just amazing. I hope I can one day write a character that's half as good as he is. And this book just started it all, and I love it for that. So anyways, number 8, and it's not quite a novel, but it is Watchmen by Alan Moore. It is a graphic novel, and it's kind of, iconic. It follows this group of superheroes in the 1980s in this alternate timeline where Richard Nixon never stopped being president and superheroes were outlawed, and also superheroes are real. And it's very different than your typical graphic novel or comic. It's not like what you get nowadays. There was an HBO sequel recently that was really good, but by far this is just the most in-depth single volume comic. I mean, overall, my favorite comic would be Sandman, but that's not just one book, so I'm not going to include it for this list. But Watchmen just is a whole complete story. It's just perfect. The characters are horrible, they're disgusting, they're despicable, but I love them despite that. But yeah, number 6, or actually number 7, sorry, is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I read this when it came out last year, and it's a very beautiful book. It's beautifully written. There's a love story in there that's just heartbreaking and heartwarming, and just, I love it. I love everything about it, which I think I've said for every one of these books. That's why they're on this list, but especially this is just a fantasy story, but it's not like your typical hero's journey or even like your typical book, really. It goes through a long period of time. It follows a girl named Addie who lives in 1700s France, and she makes a deal with one of the gods that comes out after dark to stay young forever. And so she does, but there's consequences, and that nobody knows who she is. Like, she'll talk to somebody and then they'll immediately forget about her. And the concept of this book alone sold me, and the story is just perfect. So yeah, that's number 7. Number 6 is actually the only book I don't have on me right now. It is Revival by Stephen King. It is one of the scariest books I have ever read. It's my personal favorite from King, which is big praise because I love most of his books. There were several considered for this list, but Revival, it follows this kid named Jamie who grows up in this town, and there's this preacher who loses his family in a horrible accident and like curses God. But he also then becomes determined to find out like where his family went and what's beyond death. And death scares me, so like Stephen King getting into the whole like pulling back that curtain is just terrifying because he does it perfectly. The final 10 pages of that book scared me to hell and back, and it's just such an excellent, scary, terrifying book. It's really just like the best Stephen King book, like modern wise, period, if not overall. So number 5 is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. And this is a different book. This is very unique on this list because it's what I would call fantasy, but it's not your typical fantasy. It follows 2 protagonists. You have Aomame. She is a character who does things, and I don't want to spoil what those things are, but she has a very unique profession. And it also follows a struggling writer named Tango who writes really well, but his stories are just crap. And his editor brings him with this girl who wrote this really intriguing story, but her writing is crap. And so they're like, hey, you should rewrite the story. And the story follows goats and little people that crawl out of goats and make air chrysalises. And it gets weird because while that's happening, Aomame notices that there's now 2 moons in the sky and other things have changed. And so yeah, it's very much inspired by 1984. Not like, it doesn't take many of the plot elements or really like settings. It's just more of the themes that it deals with, and I just love it. It's beautifully written. Murakami could write about like somebody cooking food for 15 pages and I would just read it because his writing style is just perfect. So yeah, that's 1Q84. And at number 4, we have American Gods by Neil Gaiman. And if you know me in real life, you know I love Neil Gaiman too much. His writing is like candy for me. It's just so literary but whimsical and amazing. I love Coraline, like I said earlier. I love The Sandman, The Graveyard Book, Ocean at the End of the Lane. But American Gods is like a straight up fantasy epic. This is the original, my first edition of it. I also have other copies. I probably own more copies of this book than any other, but it follows a character named Shadow that just recently got out of prison, and he gets contacted by this guy named Mr. Wednesday, who hires him to become his bodyguard. And he doesn't really like explain what's going on, and Shadow's very uncertain of it all. And it's hard to explain without spoiling anything. Mind you, I'm going to do reviews for all of these books. I mean, these are my favorite books, so expect to see reviews on this channel of all of these here pretty soon, probably. But this one in particular, I don't know what to say that doesn't spoil it. It does delve into the idea that gods are real, but that they only exist by the power of belief that you have in them. And so all of the old gods like Odin and Anubis and all of those like ancient gods still exist, but they're just not nearly as powerful as the new gods like media, incorporation, and all of that. And it's a very unique take on fantasy, but I love it to death. So at number 3, we have Dune by Frank Herbert. And honestly, probably cheating a little bit because I mean, it's not only Dune, but Dune Messiah. I consider those books equal. They don't form a whole story. I mean, this by itself is a whole story, but when you pull Messiah into it, you have to have the third book, Children of Dune. But Children, I'm not as happy about. It's still great, but it's not as good as the first 2. Dune follows a character named Paul Atreides, who is part of this huge, like, feudal empire, and his father, the Duke Leto Atreides, is invited to the planet Arrakis, where they are put in charge of the spice, which is this substance that enables space travel and living longer, and basically if you control the spice, you control the universe. And his enemies want that, and it's actually a trap, and there's giant space worms and knowing the future, and it's a lot. It's very complex. There's a lot of like political themes. Frank Herbert wrote this book with the idea of political leaders should come with a warning label on them, because that's really, I love, like, Dune builds up your hero, you fall in love with him, and then Dune Messiah just tears him down. It tears down the curtain in between what you thought he was, and it's just the perfect story. And I can't wait for the movie that's coming out later this year. Expect a review on that. And I mean, Dune is just, it's perfect. Number 2 is 1984 by George Orwell. So it's our second book, you know, with the numbers 1, 8, and 4 in it. But this is probably the book I've read most throughout my life. My dad had me read it back when I was in middle school. He had me read a bunch of classics like The Catcher in the Rye, 1984, Red Badge of Courage. But 1984 just fascinated me because it does have a lot of political messages, but it was my first introduction to this big, like, unique, different world. Well, besides like Harry Potter, but that's Earth. This is also Earth, but it's a Earth where everything is screwed up and you're constantly watched. Everyone knows what you say, where you go. Big Brother's always watching you, and it's just such a I can't speak today. Suspenseful book, and the story is a lot better than people give it credit for. Usually, English teachers shove this down people's throats in high school, and it makes them, you know, kind of hate it. But yeah, this book is honestly really great, despite what people think of it in English class, and I love it to death. And so before we get to number 1, I have some honorable mentions. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. It's a very controversial book. Don't know if we're ever going to see the third book, Doors of Stone, but Name of the Wind is so beautiful. The prose is just gorgeous. The story is great, although the main character, Quoth, is kind of a womanizing dickhead, but, you know, such is life sometimes, unfortunately. And nevertheless, just the world that Rothfuss creates is amazing. Also, It by Stephen King, that's the other favorite of mine. I just love that book to death. It's a little bit overdrawn sometimes, which is the only reason why it didn't make it onto this list. But it's just such a great, heartwarming story of friendship and love, and also monsters. Horrifying, terrifying, mind-blowing monsters. And lastly would be The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. That comic is perfection. It's a story about stories, and I love that. Okay, so number 1, what is my favorite book of all time? It is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Big surprise. I am in love with the story. To've only ever read it once, so some people might question, should this be on your top 10 favorites? Yes, it took me a while to get through because I just soaked it up. It was just, each chapter and book in this is just perfection. The story, the narrative that Tolkien created is just so real and amazing and deep and wonderful, and I love it to death. And I just really, I can't wait. I'm going to reread this hopefully later this year in the middle of one of my breaks from what would be my Wheel of Time read through, but right now I love this book. I love The Hobbit too. I mean, I'd probably throw The Hobbit in because The Hobbit is just amazing. The Silmarillion, I'm going to actually be doing a multi-part review of that at some point here in the future. I'm thinking like Silmarillion Sundays, but we'll see. I mean, The Silmarillion's great, but Lord of the Rings is just 1,000 pages of perfection. So yeah. Anyways, that has been my top 10 favorite books. So now you know, like I said, we'll be doing reviews of each of those on this channel. And I'll go more into why I love each of them. I might make it like its own series of like my top 10 favorite books. Might even do it in order, I don't know. But anyways, that's all for today. So thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe, share with your friends, like, comment, do whatever. And yeah, I'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Bye.